Page 774. 774. Okay. By Dabar Hashem on Moshe Lemor. Hashem says to Moshe the following. Dabar el Aaron v'amarta elov. Speak to Aaron and you shall say to him. That's going to need a clarification. Why does it say if you speak to somebody, you're saying to them, right? Dabar el Aaron v'amarta. Speak to Aaron and say to him. Why is it why is there a double terminology here? Beha'Aloscha haneros, when you raise up the neros, el mulpnei menorah Yeshivat haneros, towards the middle, the candle should burn towards the middle. This is the command about lighting the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. So the first idea here is that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rashi says, why is this Parsha put next to the previous week's Parsha? Last week's Parsha, if you remember, the end of the Parsha was with the gifts, the donations that the heads of the tribes brought to the, we have 6 times 12, 72 psukim describing it. What each one brought was the exact same thing. Right? That was also one of the proofs of the authenticity of Torah is that no human being would have written it that way. No human being would have written the exact same thing for each one. As you noticed in the laning last week, that's just one of the proofs they use. Not that we need proof, but that's one of the, what human being would have just written the exact same thing over 12 times. So why did they do it, by the way? Why did they write it over 12 times? Why did they? Why did Hashem have it written over 12 times? Is that a good question, right? I'm sure you were wondering about that as you sat there during the Torah reading. Like, why are we reading this again? And there are 2 answers. Answer number 1 is that it's emphasizing that each one of them thought of it independently. They didn't get together and decide what we're all going to, okay, let's all bring the exact same thing. That's not what happened. Each one thought independently, this is the perfect thing to give, and it just happened to be that each one came up with exactly the same thing. Not only that, do you know that the Gemara says that one of the Greek kings, Ptolemy, the P is dropped, I think it's pronounced Ptolemy. How do you pronounce it? Ptolemy, right, with a P, like pneumonia. Right? So you dropped, or psychology. So the P is dropped. But Ptolemy once gathered the Zakanim, 70 sages, and put them in separate rooms and said, translate the Torah into Greek. The Gemara says in Megillah. And each one of them made various changes because if he would have seen it, he would have had skeptical questions. And each one made a certain amount of changes in the translation, and they were all the exact same changes. One of them was his wife's name was Arnevet, and they, instead of writing Arnevet which means a rabbit, so they left the word Arnevet out of the Torah in the translation. That's just one of the examples, because he wouldn't have taken kindly to the Jews making fun of his wife and sticking in her name in the Torah as a rabbit. So here you also have an example. The Nesiim and the Meforshim say the Nesiim independently. Each one thought of what to bring, which is one reason. The other reason is on a practical level. Imagine people donating money to a shul. You know, sometimes they make appeals in shuls. It's like the rabbi gets up and he says, "Okay, I got some. We need to build a new wing for the shul. The shul's expanded. We need to build on a new wing on the shul. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is we already have the money. The bad news is it's in your pockets." So if somebody said, people start donating now, the Cohen family donated $1,000. They write the Levin family, ditto. The Goldman family, ditto. Right? Those are the last donations you're ever going to get from the Levins and the Goldmans, right? Nobody wants to be a ditto. Everybody wants their name up on the plaque with what they donated. So here, in honor of each one's donation, we write out what the donation is. Instead of saying, well, that's what the first one from Nachum ben Amino, and that's what subsequent ones brought also. Well, thank you very much. You deserve the honor of having your name eternally written in the Torah, and the effects that go with the name written in the Torah, which, by the way, if a name is written in the Torah, so every time you read that name, there are eternal benefits for the Neshama. And if it's not a good thing, so then there are eternal negative consequences for the Neshama. So it's not good to have your name written in the Torah in a bad way, like Korach and what's his name, Zimri ben Salu, and anybody else who did bad things in the Torah, Esav. It's not good to have your name written. And by the way, they say that, I don't know what the source is, but on Purim, when we read Haman's name, everybody bangs on the tables and then makes noise on Haman. Apparently, they say, I don't know who they is exactly, but they say that Haman feels it. Wherever Haman is right now, the Haman is feeling the pain. In any event, so the Rashi says, why is this section written juxtaposed to that section? And Rashi says that Aaron was jealous. Take a look at Rashi. It's the top line of Rashi. First line. Beha'Aloscha, lama nismecha Parsha menorah Parsha Nesim. Why is the Parsha of the menorah written right after the Parsha of the Nesim, the heads of the tribes? Page 774, right column, top line. Lefi shekshara Aaron chanukas hanesim. When Aaron saw it, chol shadaito. He was depressed. Shelo haya imayim bechanuka lahu v'lo shifto. Aaron was not included, not him and not his tribe. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu chayecha, I promise you, shalcha gedola mishalahem. What you're going to do is greater than theirs. Shatam madlik umetiv v'saneros. Because you're going to be lighting and fixing up the candles in the menorah. So what you're getting is greater than them. Why? Why is that greater? Because you get to light the candle, you get to light the menorah. Why? Why is that a greater? Hashem says, Aaron, what you're given, your portion is going to be even more significant than theirs. So the Ramban, there's a very famous Ramban. Ramban says, theirs was given one time. What do you say?
I was going to say that Aaron's is going to be eternal.
Where is it eternal?
In the story of Hanukkah.
You're very good. That's very good. That's what the Ramban says. The Ramban says that we're going to be doing this for generations because the Hanukkah lighting of the Hanukkah menorah is actually a continuation of the lighting of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. It's a commemoration of lighting a menorah. By the way, it's a common mistake. It's not the 8 candles that we're lighting. Is not that the menorah had 8 candles. We're lighting one menorah. We're lighting one menorah, and the 8 candles for the days of Hanukkah. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash had seven. It's each day is a commemoration of the menorah, but each day the candles are the days of Hanukkah, not the amount of candle lights in the menorah. Okay, so Aaron was upset. So Hashem gives him the lighting of the menorah. Now, let's go back to the original question. Daber el Aaron ve'amarta elav. So the Al Sheikh HaKadosh was one of the, if you've been up to Tzfas, in the famous, he was one of the Kabbalists, one of the great Kabbalists, one of the great commentaries on the Torah. He says, you see, there's a menorah down here and there's a menorah in the heavens. Everything you do in the physical realm, you take ink and you write on a parchment and turn it into a Sefer Torah. That parchment, that physical parchment, which came from the hide of an animal, that physical parchment now has Kedusha on it. You took something, ink, and parchment, and now you've rendered it a Kedusha by writing on it. And you have a Sefer Torah, and you teach a Sefer Torah with respect. That means that something in the physical world now has some sort of ruchni, a spiritual component. So based on the sources, there is a menorah down here, but there's a menorah up there. And when you're lighting the physical menorah down here, you're fixing the spiritual menorah up there. So Daber El Aaron is Moshe Rabbeinu conveying the secret of what he's about to do. He's conveying, which the Torah doesn't tell us all that, because a lot of the things which are what's called sod is secret, Kabbalistic ideas, that remains, it's not for everybody, not everybody knows that. Moshe transmits that to Aaron. Then Ve'amarta Elav is the command of what to do, which is the command of lighting the menorah. Now you'll notice that the expression is Beha'Aloscha El Haneros. Beha'Aloscha, when you raise them up. Now, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says Beha'Aloscha. It's the 4th line of Rashi, right column. Al Shem Shehalahav Ola, because the flame goes up. Ksiv Behadlakosa and Loshan Aliyah. It says when you light them, you use an expression of raising it up, because flame goes up. Shetzorich lahadlik at sheteya shel eves ola me'ala. You gotta light it until the flame rises on its own. That means when he lit it, he held the whatever he was lighting with, he held it to the flame until he's sure that the flame is burning on its own. Then he moves his hand away. But you got to make sure that the flame is now capable of burning on its own. Number 2, says Rashi, ve'od darshu rabboseinu. Mikan shemala haisa lifnei ha-menorah. There were steps in front of the menorah, some sort of steps that he went up. She'aleha hakohen omed, which the kohen stood on. Now, there are several issues here have to be dealt with. The first one is, there's a pasuk that says, Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. God's candle, Ner Hashem. God's candle is man's neshama. God's flame, candle, is our neshama. Our neshama is, the pasuk says, is like God's candle. What does that mean? Why is our neshama compared to a flame? So there's a natural, the flame, when you like fire, the flame flickers upwards or it burns upwards. It's always jumping upwards. Man's neshama is restless. Our neshama is always looking. We're searching for something. That's the idea. A lot of people travel. I don't know where you guys travel to. I'm not a big traveler. I mean, I do travel. I travel right from the Shabbos table. Right, you walk Dalet Amos, because the Torah, the Gemara says you don't lie down until you've walked. After you eat, it's not healthy to just plop down. Apparently, Gemara says that because the old days they used to eat on couches. They used to eat, like we recline on Pesach. So for us, it's uncomfortable. So when you have to try to figure out how to get a full cup of wine into your mouth while you're reclined like this, it takes a little bit of acrobatics. And it also takes a laundering your shirt, because you never make it. That's true. But in the old days, it was natural, because the old days they lied on, like the Cleopatra lying on the couch, and that's how the aristocracy ate. That's why we lean on Pesach. And the halacha is you have to lean when you're drinking the wine and we're eating the kazayas of matzah. You have to be leaning, so because we're trying to show that we're aristocrats. We are generally uncomfortable with it because we're not used to it. But in the old days, they ate laying down. So the Gemara says the easiest thing to do, now just picture eating your 1 or 2 helpings of chont, 1 or 2 dozen helpings of chont, and then knocking it down with a little bit of Johnny Walker or Jack Daniels, and then the easiest thing to do is just grab a pillow and go to sleep. If you manage to bench without falling asleep, and then lie down. So Gemara says it's not healthy. Get up and walk around Dalet Amos first. Walk Dalet Amos, then you could lie down. Reb Chaim Kanievsky actually once went into his room. He went to sleep, then he got up and he walked back and forth in the living room, and they went back to bed. So they asked him, why did you do that? He said, because I walked to my bed, which was more than Dalet Amos from the table, but I didn't have in mind that I'm doing it to fulfill the dictum of Chazal. So I wanted to make sure that I'm doing it because Chazal said so, not just because I'm tired. So I came out, walked back and forth, then I went back. So what I started saying was my traveling is generally the same. I travel Dalet Amos from table to bed. That's about it. Other people travel all over the world. People go to Indonesia, people go to China, people go all over the place. Why are people traveling? Why are people traveling so much? What are you looking for? Sometimes you find the planes are crossing in the air. Some guy was in the east and he was in the west. Well, just talk to each other. I was searching for something. The answer is people are searching. People are searching. And where do they go? They go to India, they go to Tibet, and all these places. People are searching, especially young people. Old people know they're never going to find it. Young people are searching. That search is translated into the physical world. But people, by definition, why is that? The flame is flickering. We understand that there's something higher. Our neshama is jumping up. We're restless. We're looking for something. Till you're beaten up when you're 50 years old and you realize you're just a working stiff and you got to pay for your kids' college tuition. So then you give up on the search and you haven't got the energy anyway. But there's a search, a natural search. That's the comparison to the flame. That our neshama is jumping. What we're looking for is something in the spiritual realm. That's really what we're looking for. And that's why a lot of people do go to these Far East countries where they're looking for something. You get to sit on a bed of nails for a few months because that's supposed to be spiritual. I don't know exactly what's spiritual about that, but apparently it is. There is some spirituality there. And people are searching for it till they realize it's not what I'm looking for. It's right here in my backyard. And they eventually come to Ohr Somayach. And then they realize they have a bed of nails here too. But okay, that's a different. But that's not part of the plan. That's a fallback position. At the end of the day, that's the nature. What a man is searching. Man is searching, and what we're looking for. The mistake people make is they're looking for it in the physical world, because the physical world is finite, whereas the spiritual world is infinite. And that's what we're really searching for. That's what we find eventually. That's why a person, when they connect to Torah and mitzvahs, that's why they experience a certain sense of satisfaction. That satisfaction is that the neshama is being fed. It's no different than when a person is sitting at a table and he's physically hungry and he satiates his hunger. That's the neshama is being. The only difference is that the neshama never staggers away from the table full because he's had 4 or 5 helpings of cholent. Whereas the neshama is always looking for more spirituality, and that's what satisfies it. That's the idea being compared to the candle, number 1. Number 2, why do you need them? Forshim asks, why do you need steps in front of the menorah? How tall was the menorah? The menorah is 18 tefachim high. 18 tefachim is 3 amos. 3 amos is about 5 feet high. Now, your average person, Aaron was tall. Your average person should be able to light the menorah without walking up steps to light the menorah. The average person should be able to light the menorah just right where you are. Why do you need steps? Why do you need steps to light the menorah? So Moshe Feinstein says, the Torah is teaching us over here, you're right, you could light the menorah like this. You could reach up and light the menorah like this. But if you walk up a couple of steps and then you look down at it, you're going to do a better job. You're going to be more efficient. You're going to do the job properly. So the Torah, Moshe Feinstein, the Torah is teaching, when you do a mitzvah, do the mitzvah right. Do the mitzvah, any mitzvah that we're doing, we should do the mitzvah the most efficient way possible. Don't just do it kind of backhanded. Do the mitzvah the best way that the mitzvah could be done. If a person is putting on tefillin, make sure, look your tefillin over. Make sure that it's completely black. Make sure that the corners are black and make sure that there are no chips in the tefillin. Do the mitzvah right. If you're going to put them on, put the tefillin on, don't just throw them on. Put them on and make sure that you can take a little mirror and make sure that it's not coming down past the point where it shouldn't come down, or that it's any mitzvah that we're doing, do the mitzvah right. That's what he said. That's what the lesson here is. The third idea here is that, again, Rashi says that you have to make sure the flame is rising up. So you walk up steps. So a friend of mine, Rabbi, I've mentioned him in the past, Rabbi Menachem Goldberger, he's a Rav in Baltimore. So he said, the Torah is teaching you over here, obviously lighting a flame is symbolic of trying to inspire somebody else. We want to inspire another person. We all want to do that. We have people that we'd like to inspire. The Torah is teaching us the way you inspire somebody else, and the only way you could possibly hope to inspire somebody else, if you yourself are in a growth mode. If you're stepping up, if you're walking up steps, then you could try to light somebody else. How to light other people, by the way, is not, that's a problem. Sometimes people try to light other people actually using fire. That doesn't work. But whatever method it is, the people that we're trying to inspire have to sense on us that we ourselves are trying to grow. You can't tell somebody else to do it. This is a classic problem fathers run into, where they tell their kid to stop talking in shul, but the father himself keeps talking in shul. And he's trying to tell the kid that you have to study, why don't you learn Torah when you come home? It's Shabbos afternoon, go learn some Torah. Well, and the kid's looking at his father's not learning Torah. You can't tell somebody else what to do if you don't do it yourself. To the contrary, the only way to inspire other people is by setting the example, especially with children. Children see everything at home, by the way, much more than we want them to see. And the child knows what's really important to us. And if you expect to inspire your children in any area, whether it's not speaking Lashon Hara, whether it's how to treat other people, if you tell your kid, you have to be willing, don't be selfish. Yet then he drives somewhere with his father, and his father gets into a fight with a guy over a parking space. Hey, Dad, you just told me not to be selfish. What kind of, how am I supposed to not, what's going on? I heard about 2 kids, terrible story, you love it. There was this kid was struggling with his Yiddishkeit. He was having a problem. So there are people who work with these kids. So he comes to this expert where kids are struggling, and he says to him, what put you off? He says, what put me off to Yiddishkeit is my father was always preaching about Torah and mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs. Torah, he's always preaching. The neighbor one day drove up with a brand new Volvo. And my father started talking about that Volvo. His eyes were glowing like the O's in the word Volvo. He said, my father never talked about Torah and mitzvahs with that kind of excitement and enthusiasm. When it came up to Volvo, then he got all excited about the Volvo. Then I saw what's really important to him. That's what the kid said. Okay, kid's looking for an excuse. That's something else. But at the end of the day, don't give them the excuses. That's the first thing the Torah is teaching. Then the Torah says, Vayas Kein Aaron, Pasuk Beis, Pasuk Gimel, third line. Vayas Kein Aaron, El Mul Penei HaMenorah Helei Neroseh, he did it. Kasher Tiva Hashem as Hashem commanded Moshe. And here, The Torah, Rashi says one of the most difficult to understand Rashis in all of Chumash. Take a look at Pasuk Gimel. It's the right column of Rashi, 7 lines from the bottom. Vayas Kain Aaron. Everybody see? If you don't see it, please show the person. If you see it, please make sure the person next to you sees it. Vayas Kain Aaron, says Rashi, Lahagid Shivcho Shel Aaron. This teaches you the praise of Aaron. That's why the Torah is saying it. Shaloshina. He didn't veer off of what he was supposed to do. Anybody got the obvious question?
Why would Aaron never veer off?
Why would Aaron ever veer off? Aaron was given instructions by Moshe Rabbeinu. He did as he was told. You know, we're not talking about a husband over here who was asked by his wife to buy vegetables and messed up. Or sometimes, husbands get creative, like the wife who told her husband what name to name the kid at the bris. I know a couple like this. They said the baby's name, they consulted, what should we name him? So the wife, they decided to name Dovid. That was supposed to be the name. True story. It wasn't me, by the way. True story. And it wasn't my parents. And he said Dovid. So then at the bris, they announced the name. Right? V'karei Shmo v'Yisrael, Dovid Clonimus ben Shmuel. And the wife's like, what? What? Where did you get that from? The name was the Clonimus? You know anybody named Clonimus? It's a name. But it's not a very common name. As a matter of fact, I don't know anybody with that name. I think I know one person with that name. And just say, well, what was that? The husband decided at the last minute to get creative. Right? He was also bruised, right? Bruised and creative. So what? Okay, it's not a husband over here. What happened over here? Aaron didn't veer off of his instructions? What's going on? What's going on? What does that mean? Why would he veer off? Why would Aaron veer off? What do you say? Your name is? Neria. Yeah, go ahead.
He served in the Mishkan for years. Over time, you could develop habit and just find shortcuts.
Excellent. One of our very close. One of the Farshim says, you see, that there are several ideas here. One of the ideas is, how did you feel? Think to yourself, the very first time you ever put on tefillin, how did you feel? Yeah, tefillin. Ooh, whether you did it at your bar mitzvah or whether you did it later in life, I'm putting on tefillin. And I've had people say to me, Rabbi, I put on tefillin and I didn't feel anything. Because people are expecting to feel sort of the same thing as ecstasy, when they put on tefillin the first time. And often the only thing you feel is that you're losing a little bit of circulation in your arm. Hey, it's turning blue. Sometimes I just don't wrap it around your neck. So the first time you put on tefillin, I was like, wow, tefillin, you're putting it on. 6 months later, and sometimes it doesn't even take 6 months, okay, put on your tefillin. I don't remember if I put my arm, I'm putting on my tefillin and I'm putting on and I'm wrapping it around 7 times over here. Whoa, 1 second. Why is that? The answer is that things you could lose the excitement, which is a challenge, by the way, in many areas. You could lose the excitement. Aaron did it the first time. Imagine what he felt like the first time he was lighting a menorah with all the Kabbalistic secrets and everything. And he's lighting the menorah. Woo! That feeling never left. He did it every time like he did it the first time. He did it every time like he did the first time. Dan, you had a question?
Yes, Rabbi. So, I'm understanding something, Rabbi, when someone very definitely needs to remember Hashem, right?
When you put on a question, do you need to remember Hashem? Yes, you do need to remember Hashem, but the first thing right now, the way to remember Hashem is to think about my tefillin. Yeah, there should be a thought beforehand, yes. Not only that, you say Kriya Shema every day in shul. We say in the morning Kriya Shema. Do you know when you're saying Kriya Shema, you're fulfilling a Torah command of saying Kriya Shema every day. And a person should pause for a second and think to himself, I am now fulfilling a Torah command. You should think, why am I putting on tefillin? Of course. But there's only one first time. Right? But every time we put on tefillin, a person should think I'm now fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin. The other day I was walking, there was like a raw peach. Somebody left a raw peach on the sidewalk. No, I didn't pick it up and eat it. No, there was like a crushed peach on the sidewalk. So I kicked it off. I kicked it off the sidewalk so nobody should slip. The next day there's like a tree over there. There's a peach tree. And it kind of, they fall. So the next day there was another peach on the sidewalk. So right before I kicked it off, I thought to myself, I'm fulfilling a mitzvah. Okay, just don't kick it off. I'm fulfilling a mitzvah of moving an obstacle from the public, what do you call it? To think for a second, even a split second. But when we do a mitzvah, by the way, and I'm not talking about rah-rah enthusiasm. I'm not talking about, false rah-rah. I'm talking about the energy that goes, hey, I'm doing a mitzvah over here. The same feeling we have when we eat schnitzel. Right? Every time I sit down to lunch and there's schnitzel, there's like, oh, good, schnitzel, right? It should be, oh, good, a mitzvah. As opposed to sometimes you just feel that, you forget where you are and what we're doing. Aaron maintains that enthusiasm, number one. Number two, Melamed Shaloshina is the idea that there are two utensils, vessels in the Beis Hamikdash or the Mishkan that represent Torah. The Mizbeach represents Kahuna, and the Shulchan, the showbreads, that represents Malchus, kingdom. The king is responsible for the prosperity of the Jewish people. That's what the showbreads are. What does the Aron Kodesh represent? The Aron Kodesh obviously represents Torah. What does the menorah represent? The menorah also represents Torah, the light of wisdom. So there are two utensils in the Beis Hamikdash that represent Torah. Now, the most basic reason is, why? Why do you need two utensils to represent Torah? Torah Shebiksav. Where did the Aron Kodesh go? In the Holy of Holies. Completely inaccessible. No tampering, no touching, no nothing, which obviously represents Torah Shebiksav. We can't tamper with the Chumash at all. This is it. The Chumash, the Nach, Torah Shebiksav, there's no tampering. Then there's what's called Torah Shebaal Peh, which is when we're learning Gemara. One of the great ironies of Jewish life, by the way. Let me have that Gemara for 1 second. Pull out I just show you one of the great ironies of Jewish life. The written Torah is this one book over here. This, and another 20 volumes like it, this is the oral Torah. This is one of the great ironies of Jewish life. Here we have, gentlemen, the oral Torah. Now, in the oral Torah, you have more writing than you've ever seen on any page in your life, right? You have small, smaller, minuscule, right? And then a little bit in the back also, just for good measure. This is all oral Torah. Okay, obviously, needs to be put in, right? And this is the written Torah, is one book over here. The oral Torah, the nature of Torah Shebaal Peh, is that we innovate. We come up with our own creative ideas in the oral Torah. We come up in Torah Shebaal Peh, we're what's called chidush. We're supposed to come up with a chidush, our own insights. Now, on the one hand, the Gemara says, the Medrash says, that every single, it's actually a statement in the Zohar, every single innovation that anyone ever comes up with was already given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. But we have to figure it out. This we don't have to figure out. This is written for us. So when you figure out a Tosfos and you come up with a new insight in the Gemara, that's what we're meant to be doing. But just realize that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Sinai. So what does the menorah mean in Melamed Shaloshina? I heard this from Rabbi Shiller Senior, Zichrono Livracha. He once said like this: there's a difference between chidush, which is an innovation, and shinui, which is change. The best example is probably a chessboard. When you play chess, so there's a certain amount of creativity in chess. Bobby Fischer, even when he was young, he was so innovative that he had a championship match against Boris Spassky, who was a Russian. And Fischer was so creative and innovative that at some point during the match, Spassky actually had a nervous breakdown, and it had to be because he had never dealt with this before. That's the creativity and innovation. Now, anything that's creative and innovative is accepted. But if you play chess with me, don't take your eye off the board and don't leave the room, because I have various forms of chiddush also, right? One of them involves moving pieces around. Now, that's not chiddush, that's shinui, that's changing. If my rook suddenly jumps over a piece, which will happen if you're not watching the board, that's not chiddush, that's shinui. I'm changing the rules. If you're playing watch a guy in a football, watch a running back, and a running back comes up with all sorts of creative moves on the football field, so that's chiddush. If he runs out of bounds into the stands and then shows up in the end zone, that's shinui. Melamed Shaloshina over here is saying that in the realm of Torah Shebaal Peh, Aaron represents us. In the realm of Torah Shebaal Peh, there's no shinui. There's chidush, there's no shinui. Number two. And it's important to know that in Judaism, There may be certain amount of innovation, but not shinui. Shinui is conservative. Shinui is reform. That's off limits. To change things is off limits. To come up maybe with your own a little bit what works for you within the framework of the rules, that's shinui. That's chiddush. That's okay. But not shinui. Not to come up with something about. Get to 1 second. There's one last idea here. Yeah, go ahead, Ethan. Go ahead.
So by writing down the oral Torah, we transgressed shinui?
Oh, good. Excellent question. So why were they allowed to write down the oral Torah? Excellent question. Why could they write down the oral Torah? Was it meant to be oral? The answer is that when they got to a generation where they saw Torah was being forgotten, the Beis Din the Beis Din invoked a rule that exists in Torah, which is that for the sake of preserving Torah, those who are experts of Torah are allowed to then use what's called a hora'as shah. It's an injunction was needed at that moment, at that time in history. It was needed for the sake of preservation of Torah. That's why, if you notice, by the way, most rabbinic fences that we have, rabbinic mitzvahs that are d'Rabbanan, do they make our life easier or a little bit more challenging? Most Rabbanans make it more challenging. You can't move a pen on Shabbos because it's muktzah, and you have to wait 6 hours after eating milk if you're an Ashkenazi. So if you're from German, of German the minhag it's 3 hours, but you have to wait. By rabbinic law, you could have chicken and milk. Do you know that? You could have a hot chicken cheese if there is such a chicken parmesan. Isn't there a chicken parmesan type of thing? Doesn't interest me. But the what do you call it? About rabbinic, and then rabbinic law has said no chicken with meat. Whereas when you look at the reform and conservative movements, the changes always made things easier, not harder. That's always when you got to make it suspect. You always got to be suspect if it's making either. The goal of the rabbinic law was not to make our life difficult, by the way. The goal of it was to put up a fence. Here, when Torah was being forgotten, the Beis Din of experts had the authority to say, for the sake of what's called a hora'as shah, they are able to invoke, we have to write this down, because otherwise it's going to go lost. That's why they did it. Very excellent question. You know the definition of excellent question, don't you? That I know the answer. That's the definition. That is a wonderful question. If I don't know the answer, then it's just a technical side point. So it's just interesting that if people say, well, who has the authority? Who's got the authority? But they have rabbis also. The answer is, if there's a group of women in a room, let's say you see a group of women in a room, and you're looking, there's a glass from the outside, and you see the women are talking to each other. What are they talking about? I can make an educated guess. They're either talking about the latest clothing styles, or they're talking about raising children, or they're talking about the latest clothing styles, or they're talking about how much money they want to get from their husbands this week, or they're talking about the latest clothing styles. Those are the possibilities. Now, do you know for sure what they're talking about? No. Why? Because you're not in the room. The women in the room know exactly what they're talking about, and none of them were talking about that. Turns out they weren't talking about that at all. All they were talking about is what their vacation plans are. Why do they know and the people outside don't know? You can make an educated guess. But if you're not in the room, you can't possibly know. People who have studied, people from the outside look at what Torah and Torah life is. They think they understand what's going on in our life. But if you haven't studied Torah, you can't know what Torah is about. The cynics, the skeptics through history, it's like, the Torah says this, the Torah says that. If you study Torah, then you're on the inside. So the experts who have studied Torah and became the leaders of the generation, they at that point understand when we can make this rabbinic decree. Okay, there's one other idea here by what it means shaloshina. This I think is a very, very it's a rule. We've spoken about this in the past, but you'll see that it's true. Do you know that the high-ranking military officials, generals, colonels, high-ranking, they have a very high percentage of divorce? Why is that? Because when all day long you're giving orders, and at any point you could say, if anybody starts talking to you or arguing with you, at any point the general or colonel could say, that's an order, major, sergeant. And if you say one more word, you could be court-martialed. When you come home and you have a wife, it doesn't work that way. If anything, it works in the other direction. That's an order, corporal. I grew up, anytime I'd go to my father, Shalom, many times I go, we'd go to ask my father, so he said, I'm a buck private, go ask the general. That's how I grew up. Mom was the general. A general, a high-ranking military official, and all of a sudden there's somebody who's arguing with you, and you can't say, hey, supper on the table, woman, at 1800 hours, right? That doesn't work, because it's going to be tuna fish at 1800 hours, right? That doesn't work at home. And in life, you find this in other areas as well, where a person you have a position during the day, but you have to know how to turn it on and turn it off. I had a kid once, his father was a principal of a school, kid of the other yeshiva. So I asked him, when you grow up, would you like to become a principal? He said, no way. He said, before I even got the words, I said, no way. I said, why not? He said, Rabbi, you don't know how difficult it is to be raised in the principal's office. That means that his father was a principal outside the home and he was a principal in the home. But you can't raise your kids like a principal. You can't be a principal at home. And you have to know that, and there are other fields in life where you have to know how to turn it on and turn it off. Now, what was Aaron well known for? What was Aaron well known for? Making shalom between husbands and wives and between people who are upset with each other. Well, the Gemara says that there's a halacha. Listen to the words carefully. You're allowed to be mishane mipnei hashalom. You can veer off of the truth for the sake of shalom. And not only that, there's a halacha. I've mentioned this before. If your father's upset and he says, hey, who had the last piece of pie? And you know that your mother did, you're allowed to lie and say it was me, so that your father doesn't get upset with your mother. Do you know that? You're allowed to lie. It's a halacha. So for the sake of shalom, you're allowed to be mishana mipnei hashalom. So what was Aaron doing when he was making shalom bayis and he was stopping husbands and wives who were upset with each other? What was he doing for many hours a day? He was being mishana. Oh, what's the praise of Aaron? The praise of Aaron is that he knows when to turn it on and turn it off. Outside, when he's dealing with people and shalom bayis problems and a couple of guys who are fighting in shul and he's making peace, then Aaron is able to be mishana. But when it comes to the menorah, then you follow the instructions to the letter. And it's not easy when a person has a certain ability or a certain nature to turn it on and turn it off. You've been doing that all day. Lawyers. I told you, I heard about a guy in Israel. There's a lawyer who was a middleman between a group. There were certain contractors, and I think on one end, and politicians on the other. And I heard this interview on the radio. And this guy was a lawyer. They're talking to, he was the middleman. It was the whole murky business. And the interviewer says to him in Hebrew, tell me something, did you ever have to lie? He says, let's put it this way. There were certain days that I told the truth. That's what the guy said on a live interview, but shamelessly. So often when you're in a situation where you got to start making it, you don't even know where truth begins, where the lie ends, where the lie and truth begins. You're so used to it, you lie to your way. You're like, that's the praise of Aaron. By the way, I was asked, are you allowed to be meshana for the sake of your own shalom bayis? Can a husband come home and a wife says, why are we home so late? He was out drinking beer with the boys. A husband comes out and says, well, there was this little old lady, and she just, me and Mike, we just had to take her to the hospital, and it was, what do you call it? And the wife is like, oh, I guess they're serving a lot of beer in the hospital. Huh? The guy smells like beer or booze. Well, no, that's the antiseptic from the hospital. They got it. So the question is, according to halacha, are you? I once asked this I asked a couple of Rabbi. One Rav said to me, sure, why not? If you can do it for other people, why can't you do it for another? Rav said to me, no. What I say to you, gentlemen, is even if it's permissible, don't do it. A, she's going to figure it out. B, the one thing that the wife is bothered by more than anything else is that you're not being honest with her. Doesn't matter what you did wrong. Doesn't matter what you did wrong. You can spend all your paycheck at a casino. Just tell her, right? She'll be upset for a little, she'll get over it. But if she finds out that you were lying, and by the way, for a woman, lying means not disclosing everything. What we call not disclosing information, they call a lie. Don't do it. Don't do it. They read you like a book. right? And they'll figure it out. So Aaron, who's involved all the time in being Mishana, and the praise for Aaron is Melamed Shaloshina. That's the praise for Aaron. Okay. Then the Torah says like this. Pasuk Vav. Skip on down now. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lebor. Kaches haLevi mitoch bnei Yisrael v'tiharta osam. Take the Leviim from the Jewish people, and you are going to purify them. V'chosasa lahem l'taharam hazeh aleim mechatas. First, you're going to sprinkle the parah aduma water on any of them who are ritually impure. 4 lines from the bottom. Ve'heviru sa'ar al kol bisaram. They will take an open blade and they will shave an open blade over all exposed areas of their body. V'chibzu bigdeim v'hitaharu. Now, this begs a question. They're going to take a blade and they're going to shave off all visible hair from their body. A blade cut. That means the hair, the sides, the face, and so on and so on. Everything that's visible. The obvious question is, but the Torah says you're not allowed to shave with a razor. How do you reconcile that?
Torah says so.
What's that?
Torah says so.
That's very good. This has to be clear because people ask this all the time. How can we push a goat off a cliff on Yom Kippur if the Torah says don't be cruel to animals? And how could the Levim, there are a few other examples. How can you marry your brother's wife for Yibum if the Torah says it's forbidden to marry a brother's wife if the man dies? Obviously, the brother died. How could it? The answer is the same Torah that said you can't is telling you over here that you have to, and whether you could or you have to. So the Levim, all of it, no, this is not, people sometimes get thrown off by that. Right? How can you're pushing a goat off the cliff, but the Torah says the only reason we don't push goats off cliff normally is because the Torah says don't. Not because of compassion for the animals. The only reason we don't shave with a razor is because the Torah says don't shave with a razor. God said it. As I told you, it's like a knight jumping pieces in chess. But you're not allowed to jump over pieces. Yes, but the knight could, or my rook, as the case may be. So the knight could jump over pieces. Why? Because whoever made the rule said you can't, but here you could. That's the idea. And therefore the Leviim have to shave. Now, what is symbolic? What does that mean? Why are the Leviim who are now being initiated into the service, why is it that they shave all visible hair? Why are they shaving it off? And not only that, the hair in the private areas of the body, the armpit in the private area is not shaven. But all visible hair is shaven. Why? What does the hair symbolize? Very good. Share represents excess. All excess has to be removed. The Levim have to be very, very focused on serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu. But the private areas represents the idea that yes, they're completely devoted. On the other hand, they do have a home and a family. They have their private affairs, and they can't neglect their own private affairs totally. And this sometimes happens where people become rah-rah Yiddishkeit, that they're very, very devoted to God, and they forget that they also have a wife and children, and they have people who live on the planet also. And you have to remember that you have to take care of, make sure you have a parnasa, and you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and your own responsibly. You're not just devoted to the community. And you find this often happens that a man is so devoted to the community, he neglects his wife and children. And you have to know where the balance is. So they need you to help out in the shul, and the guy's ready to run out of the house, but his wife needs help in the home with the kids. What's your priority? You have to remember what your priority is. Obviously the shul. Your priority is obviously the wife of the kids. And sometimes it's the difficulty here is because as a human being, I know that if I help out in the shul, I'm likely to hear somebody the next day say, "Wow, I heard that you put all the sitters away. Wow, that's pretty impressive. You're such a tzaddik." And at home, when you do the dishes, nobody's calling you a tzaddik. Right? At home, when you're helping out, when you're getting up in the middle of the night with a crying baby, or you get up in the middle of the night to wake your wife up to take care of the crying baby, nobody's impressed. Nobody's impressed. That's just something that you got to do. And therefore, it's difficult because we feel that I'm going to get a little bit more of a prestige or praise outside the home, which is always the way it is. People outside the home are always better than they are at home. At home, we let down our guard. Outside the home, we're on our best behavior, real gentlemen, everything. When you get home, all of a sudden it all comes out. It's the exact opposite. It's supposed to be the exact opposite. We should be on our best behavior at home, and outside the home is when we should let it down. Okay, gentlemen, we continue tomorrow. Mitzvah Hashem.